Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview crumble in real time? On live television, in front of millions of viewers? Bob Marley was about to do exactly that to one of America's most racist TV hosts. And what happened in those 12 minutes would become the most watched interview segment in television history. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shaped the legends we know today. November 15, 1978, CBS Television Studios, New York City, 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The Tonight with America show was broadcasting live to 23 million viewers across the United States. Bob Marley had just finished performing One Love in the studio, and host Richard Brennan was preparing for what he thought would be a routine interview. But Richard Brennan wasn't a routine host. He was a 52-year-old former radio shock jock who had built his career on controversy, provocation, and barely concealed racism. CBS had hired him specifically because his inflammatory style brought in viewers and advertising dollars. Brennan had made it clear to his producers that he didn't want that Jamaican drug dealer on his show. But Bob Marley's new album, Kaya, was climbing the charts, and the network executives overruled him. If Brennan wanted to keep his job, he'd interview Bob Marley. But that didn't mean he had to be nice about it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan said as Bob sat down in the guest chair, "we're here with Bob Marley, the so-called king of reggae. Tell me, Bob, how does it feel to make music that encourages drug use and laziness?" The question was designed to provoke. Bob had dealt with hostile interviewers before, and he remained calm. "Music is about love, brother," Bob replied gently. "Music is about bringing people together, not dividing them." Brennan smirked. "Bringing people together? Your songs are full of references to marijuana, rebellion against authority. Aren't you just corrupting America's youth?" "I sing about freedom," Bob said. "Freedom from mental slavery. Freedom to think for yourself. Freedom to love instead of hate." The audience could sense the tension building. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat about music. "Mental slavery?" Brennan laughed mockingly. "That's rich, coming from someone whose ancestors were actually slaves. Tell me, do you think your people would have been better off staying in Africa instead of coming to America?" The studio went dead quiet. Bob's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. The question wasn't just ignorant, it was deliberately cruel. "My people," Bob said quietly, "didn't choose to come to America, brother. They were stolen, kidnapped, sold like cattle, but we survived. We grew strong. We found our voice." Brennan saw Bob's composure, and it made him angrier. He'd been hoping to rattle this arrogant Jamaican, but Bob's calm dignity was making him look foolish. "Found your voice?" Brennan's tone grew nastier. "You found your voice singing about drugs and revolution. You people always blame everyone else for your problems instead of taking responsibility." Bob remained perfectly still. "What do you mean, you people?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Brennan realized he'd walked into dangerous territory, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Not on live television. Not in front of 23 million viewers. "You know exactly what I mean," Brennan said, his voice getting louder. "You people. You're kind. You..." And then he said it. The word that would end his career and change his life forever. He called Bob Marley the most vicious racial slur in the English language. The studio audience gasped. Camera operators looked up from their equipment in shock. In the control room, producers frantically tried to figure out whether to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling. Bob Marley sat perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the boom operator had to strain to pick it up. "What did you just call me?" Brennan's face was red with rage and embarrassment. He'd crossed a line on live television, and he knew it. But instead of apologizing, He doubled down. You heard me. That's what you are. That's what all of you are. Coming to our country, spreading your jungle music, corrupting our children. Bob stood up slowly. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to walk off the set. Or worse, that he might become violent. The security guards moved closer. But what Bob did next was something no one expected. He sat back down, leaned forward, and looked directly into Richard Brennan's eyes. Tell me about your father, Bob said softly. The question was so unexpected that Brennan stopped mid-rant. What? Your father. What was he like? What does my father have to do with anything? Brennan sputtered. Tell me about him, Bob repeated, his voice gentle but insistent. Brennan looked confused, angry, caught off guard. My father was a good man. He worked hard. He fought in the war. Did he love you? The question seemed to pierce through Brennan's anger like a knife. His face flickered with something unexpected. Pain. Of course he loved me. What kind of question is that? Did he tell you that? Did he say the words? Brennan's anger was beginning to crack. He wasn't that kind of man. He showed it other ways. How? He provided, he worked, Brennan's voice was getting smaller. He did his best. Bob nodded. What did he teach you about people who look different from you? Brennan shifted uncomfortably. The studio was dead silent. 23 million viewers watched a man being gently dismantled on live television. He taught me to be proud of who I am. Did he teach you to hate? No, Brennan said quickly, then paused. I mean, he taught me that that we had to be careful. Careful of what? Brennan looked lost. Of people who might hurt us. Take what we had. Do I look like I want to hurt you, Richard? Brennan stared at Bob. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. He was supposed to be in control, supposed to be making Bob look bad. Instead, he felt like he was being seen through, understood in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. No, but you're different. You're not like what? Not like them. Not like the ones my father warned me about. Bob leaned back slightly. Your father was scared, wasn't he? Scared of losing what he had. Scared of change. Scared of people he didn't understand. Brennan's voice was barely audible. Yes. And he passed that fear to you. I'm not afraid, Brennan said, but his voice betrayed him. Fear makes people do ugly things, Richard. Fear makes people say words they don't mean. Words that hurt. Bob's voice remained gentle, but it carried a weight that seemed to fill the studio. When you called me that word just now, was that your fear talking? Or was that you? Brennan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. For the first time in the interview, he looked directly at Bob Marley. Really looked at him. Not at the dreadlocks, not at the skin color, not at the stereotype he'd built in his mind. He looked at the human being sitting across from him, and what he saw broke something inside him. Brennan's voice cracked. I don't know. Your father, did he ever meet anyone like me? Did he ever sit and talk with someone different from him? No, Brennan whispered. He stayed with his own kind. And you've done the same. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A truth that cut through decades of conditioning and prejudice. Yes, Brennan admitted. Bob reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph. He handed it to Brennan. This is my son, Ziggy. He's 10 years old. He loves football and comic books and ice cream, just like any other child. Brennan looked at the photograph, a smiling boy with his father's eyes. When you see him, what do you see? Brennan stared at the photo for a long time. The cameras captured every second of his internal struggle. I see a little boy. Just a little boy? Yes. Not a threat? Not someone to fear? No, he's just a kid. Bob nodded. But tomorrow, when he grows up, what will people like you see? The question hit Brennan like a physical blow. He understood what Bob was asking. This innocent child would grow up to face the same hatred, the same prejudice, the same ugly words that Bob faced every day. They'll see. Brennan couldn't finish the sentence. They'll see what you saw when you looked at me 10 minutes ago. Brennan was crying now. Not just tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. Live on television, in front of millions of viewers, a racist TV host was having his soul surgery performed by a Jamaican musician. "I'm sorry," Brennan managed to say through his tears. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why because you were taught to," Bob said gently. "Because fear was passed down to you like a family heirloom. But fear doesn't have to define you, Richard. You can choose something different." Brennan looked up at Bob through his tears. How? How do I change something that's been inside me my whole life?" Bob smiled, the first real smile he'd shown since the interview began. One conversation at a time, one person at a time, one choice at a time. Bob stood up and extended his hand to Brennan. "My name is Bob Marley. I'm a father, a musician, and a human being. What's your name?" Brennan looked at the extended hand. Shaking it would be admitting everything. It would be acknowledging his racism, his ignorance, his fear. It would be the end of Richard Brennan, the shock jock, and the beginning of Richard Brennan, the human being. He took Bob's hand. "My name is Richard Brennan, and I think I've been wrong about a lot of things." The studio audience erupted in applause. Not the polite applause of a TV show, but the kind of applause reserved for moments of genuine human transformation. Bob sat back down. "Would you like to start over, Richard?" Brennan wiped his eyes and nodded. Yes, I would." "Then let's talk. Really talk. Person to person." What happened in the remaining 8 minutes of that interview became television legend. Richard Brennan asked Bob about his childhood, his music, his hopes for his children. He listened, really listened, as Bob spoke about growing up in poverty in Jamaica, about the power of music to heal wounds and build bridges. But more importantly, Bob asked Richard questions too, about his fears, his upbringing, the pain that had been passed down from father to son like a poisonous inheritance. By the end of the interview, two strangers had become something resembling friends. When Bob performed One Love again to close the show, Richard Brennan stood up and applauded with genuine appreciation. The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. CBS received over 50,000 phone calls in the first hour after the show aired. Some were from angry viewers who thought Brennan should be fired for his racist comments. Others were from people inspired by what they'd witnessed, a public transformation, a moment of genuine human connection. Richard Brennan was indeed fired from CBS the next day, but something unexpected happened. Bob Marley called him personally. "I heard about your job," Bob said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Richard replied. "It was time for a change anyway." "What will you do now?" Richard was quiet for a moment. "I think I'd like to learn, really learn, about people, about music, about the things I never understood." 3 months later, Richard Brennan was working as a volunteer at a community center in Harlem, teaching media skills to inner-city kids. He discovered that his years in television had given him abilities that could help others, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something meaningful. Bob visited him there once, unannounced. He found Richard helping a group of teenagers produce a radio show about social justice. "You look different," Bob observed. "I feel different," Richard replied. "Lighter somehow, like I've been carrying around a weight I didn't even know was there." "Fear is heavy," Bob said. "Love is light." They talked for an hour, about music, about change, about the possibility of redemption. When Bob left, he gave Richard a guitar. "Music heals," Bob said. "Maybe it's time you learned to play." Richard Brennan never became a professional musician, but he learned to play that guitar. He played it at community events, at fundraisers, at small gatherings where people came together to talk about race, understanding, and the possibility of change. When Bob Marley died in 1981, Richard Brennan was one of thousands who gathered for memorial services around the world. At a service in New York, he was asked to speak. "I met Bob Marley on television," Richard said to the crowd. "I met him as an enemy, full of hatred and fear. But he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He saw the possibility for change, for growth, for redemption. And in 12 minutes on live television, he saved my soul." Richard paused, looking out at the diverse crowd that had gathered to honor Bob's memory. "Bob taught me that we're all connected by something deeper than skin color or nationality or religion. We're connected by our humanity. And once you really see that, once you really feel that connection, you can never go back to hate. You can never go back to fear." Today, at 96 years old, Richard Brennan still volunteers at community centers. He's written a book called 12 Minutes: How Bob Marley